My dad stood in front of 200 people, pointed at me, and shouted, "All you ever do is take." He had no idea I was the reason his house still had insurance, his taxes had been paid, and his life looked stable for the last 4 years. So I stopped paying a single bill. 30 days later, he sued me. And that's when the truth he never wanted anyone to know came out in court. If you've ever been blamed for the very sacrifices nobody saw, subscribe now, and let me tell you exactly how everything fell apart. My name is Elodie Smirnova, and the loudest lie anyone has ever told about me came from my own father. The words exploded across a banquet hall filled with nearly 200 people. All you ever do is take. Every conversation stopped. Forks paused in midair. Even the hotel staff standing near the ballroom entrance turned their heads toward our table. My father, Garrick Smirnova, stood with a champagne glass in one hand and a microphone in the other. His face was red, not because he was embarrassed, but because he enjoyed the attention. People laughed. Some looked uncomfortable. Most assumed he was telling the truth. I didn't. Because I knew something none of them did. By the time the next month arrived, my father would discover just how much I had supposedly been taking. And the lesson was going to cost him far more than money. Before I tell you how everything fell apart, you need to understand who we were before that night. I'm 33 years old, and I work as a cybersecurity consultant in Seattle, Washington. My job is to investigate financial fraud, identify hidden transactions, and uncover patterns that other people overlook. It isn't glamorous. Most of my days are spent reading spreadsheets, reviewing payment histories, interviewing clients, and tracing digital records that tell stories people wish had stayed buried. The work changed the way I see the world. Numbers don't have emotions. Bank statements don't care about excuses. Evidence stays patient. People don't. That mindset followed me everywhere, including into my own family. Growing up with my father meant learning that appearances mattered more than reality. If the neighbors drove newer cars, Dad suddenly wanted one. If someone renovated their kitchen, ours suddenly became outdated. If another family took vacations overseas, he started talking about luxury travel even when we couldn't comfortably afford groceries. Everything had to look successful. Whether it actually was never seemed to matter. When I was younger, I believed everyone lived that way. Only after moving out did I realize most families don't spend every holiday pretending everything is perfect while quietly arguing over unpaid bills after the guests leave. My parents divorced when I was 29. By then I had already built my career and lived independently for years. The divorce surprised everyone except me. The arguments had been happening for decades. They had simply become impossible to hide anymore. My mother chose peace over appearances. Dad chose appearances over accountability. After the divorce, I rarely visited his house unless my younger half-brother, Micah, invited me. Micah was 16 years younger than I was. Technically we only shared the same father. In every way that mattered, he was still my little brother. None of what happened was ever his fault. He had grown up hearing different versions of the same story. According to Dad, he had sacrificed everything for his children. According to Dad, everyone else had failed him. According to Dad, I had become selfish after finding career success. I never argued. Experience had taught me something simple. People who constantly rewrite history usually panic when someone keeps the original records. About 4 years before the retirement banquet, I learned a family secret completely by accident. My grandmother, Nadia Smirnova, had passed away after a brief illness. She wasn't wealthy by billionaire standards, but she had spent her life making careful financial decisions. She believed stability mattered more than luxury. After her funeral, I received a phone call from an attorney handling part of her estate. I expected routine paperwork. Instead, I learned she had created a trust years before her death. At first I assumed Dad had inherited everything. He hadn't. Grandma understood him better than most people did. Rather than leaving assets directly under his control, she placed several family obligations inside a legal trust designed to protect Micah until adulthood. The structure was complicated. Ownership of certain assets remained inside the trust. Responsibility for managing them could be delegated. The attorney explained every document carefully. Nothing required me to spend my own money. Nothing forced me to help. Legally, I could have walked away the same day. But then I reviewed what the trust actually protected. The property taxes on Dad's house. Insurance connected to the family residence. Maintenance costs for a small duplex Grandma had purchased years earlier. Utility balances whenever emergencies happened. Everything was designed to keep a roof over Micah's head. Not to make Dad comfortable. To make sure Micah always had somewhere safe to live. I sat in the attorney's office for nearly 2 hours asking questions. What happens if nobody manages these payments? He answered honestly. The trust survives, but unpaid obligations create risks. Those risks eventually affect everyone living there. I didn't need more explanation. I accepted responsibility voluntarily. Not because Dad deserved it. Because Micah didn't deserve instability. From that day forward, every month became part of the same routine. I reviewed statements. Transferred payments. Renewed insurance. Handled unexpected repair invoices. Authorized maintenance. Occasionally I covered temporary shortages with my own income before reimbursing myself later through the trust whenever paperwork caught up. Dad never asked who handled any of it. He simply assumed life worked itself out. At first I thought he'd eventually notice. He never did. Months became years. The furnace broke one winter. It was repaired before he returned from a weekend fishing trip. The water heater failed another summer. A contractor replaced it within 48 hours. Storm damage affected part of the roof. Insurance paperwork was completed before Dad even finished complaining to his neighbors about bad weather. Every crisis disappeared before becoming his problem. I preferred it that way. The less attention involved, the better. Meanwhile my own career continued growing. I earned promotions. Moved into a larger apartment overlooking part of downtown Seattle. Traveled for investigations. Built financial security I never imagined having when I was younger. Dad saw the results. He never asked about the work behind them. Instead, he made assumptions. Whenever relatives gathered, he'd joke that I was too busy making money to remember family. Everyone laughed politely. I usually smiled. Correcting him felt pointless. The truth wasn't something he wanted. It was something he competed against. Looking back now, I realize I made one critical mistake. I believed silence could protect everyone. I thought as long as Micah stayed safe, it didn't matter whether anyone understood my role. I underestimated how dangerous a false story becomes when nobody challenges it. By the time Dad announced his retirement, he had spent years building a reputation as the man who held the entire family together. Friends admired him. Co-workers respected him. Neighbors envied him. Nobody knew invisible work had been keeping that image alive. When the invitation arrived for his retirement banquet, I almost declined. Work had been unusually busy. One of my investigations involved a multinational company dealing with internal financial fraud, and deadlines were approaching. But Micah called me himself. I really hope you'll come, he said. It would mean a lot. He sounded excited. Hopeful. I couldn't say no. So I booked the evening off. Bought a conservative navy blue dress. Picked up a small retirement gift. And drove across the city believing it would simply be another uncomfortable family gathering. I had absolutely no idea I was walking into the moment that would change every relationship in my life. And before the night ended, my father would accuse me of being the one person who had spent years taking from him. The irony was almost impossible to measure. The retirement banquet should have ended with applause, photographs, and polite goodbyes. Instead, It ended with me driving home in complete silence, replaying my father's words over and over. All you ever do is take. The sentence wasn't the painful part. I had heard worse from him over the years. What stayed with me was the audience. 200 people had watched him publicly reduce our entire relationship to a single accusation, and not one of them knew how absurd it really was. When I pulled into my apartment garage in Seattle that night, it was nearly 11. I sat inside my car long after turning off the engine. The retirement gift I had brought him was still sitting unopened on the passenger seat. A simple leather notebook engraved with his initials. He had never even looked at it. He had been too busy performing. Eventually I carried it upstairs and placed it on my kitchen counter. Then I opened my laptop. Not because I planned revenge. Because routine calmed me. Whenever life became emotional, I returned to facts. The trust account was exactly where I had left it. Automatic reminders appeared across my dashboard. Upcoming property tax installment. Insurance renewal. Quarterly maintenance payment for the duplex. Utility reserve transfer. Everything scheduled exactly as it had been for years. I stared at the screen for several minutes. One decision separated the life my father believed he had from the life he was actually living. I selected every upcoming payment. Then I pressed cancel. One after another. The system requested confirmation. I approved it. No dramatic music. No tears. No angry speech. Just a quiet administrative decision. For the first time in almost 4 years, I stopped volunteering to manage responsibilities that had never legally belonged to me. When I finished, I closed the laptop and went to bed. I slept better than I expected. The following morning, nothing happened. Neither the next day. Nor the day after that. Life continued exactly as normal. I went back to work. My team was investigating a complicated payroll manipulation case involving falsified vendor accounts. Compared to family drama, corporate fraud felt refreshingly straightforward. Someone either moved money or they didn't. Evidence existed or it didn't. People lied. Records usually didn't. 9 days after the banquet, my phone rang during lunch. Dad. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. What? He skipped every greeting. The county says my property taxes are overdue. His voice carried irritation instead of concern. I leaned back in my office chair. I wouldn't know. What do you mean you wouldn't know? I mean exactly what I said. He sighed dramatically. Government offices get everything wrong these days. I simply replied, maybe. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Not once did he ask whether I knew anything about the payments. Not once did he wonder why the timing seemed unusual. Instead, he blamed bureaucrats. I returned to work. 3 days later another call arrived. This time he sounded angrier. My homeowner's insurance company says coverage was suspended. I hope you get it sorted out. Can you believe these idiots? I don't know the situation. You always know paperwork. There was a brief pause. For 1 second I thought he might finally ask the obvious question. He didn't. They're probably incompetent. Then he hung up. I couldn't help shaking my head. Dad wasn't looking for answers. He was looking for someone else to blame. As the weeks passed, the pattern accelerated. The landscaping company stopped servicing his yard after unpaid invoices accumulated. The water department mailed warning notices. The maintenance contractor refused to schedule repairs until outstanding balances were settled. Every inconvenience that used to disappear quietly now remained exactly where it belonged. On Dad's desk. He reacted the only way he knew how. He complained. Constantly. Social media became his favorite stage. He wrote long posts criticizing local government. He accused insurance companies of targeting retirees. He claimed businesses no longer respected loyal customers. Friends flooded the comments with sympathy. That's terrible. They don't treat people fairly anymore. So frustrating. Nobody knew the businesses weren't creating the problem. They were simply expecting payment. Meanwhile, I never mentioned any of it. Not to relatives. Not to coworkers. Not even to Micah. Silence had once protected Dad's pride. Now it simply allowed reality to arrive naturally. About a month after the banquet, I drove past his neighborhood on my way to meet a client. Curiosity made me slow down. His front lawn looked noticeably different. Grass had grown unevenly. Several flower beds were full of weeds. Leaves had collected near the driveway. The house wasn't falling apart. It just looked neglected. Like someone had stopped quietly maintaining the details. For years, those details had been invisible because someone else handled them before they became noticeable. Seeing the difference made me realize how much work had disappeared behind the scenes. Work Dad had never acknowledged. A week later Micah called. His voice sounded hesitant. Have you talked to Dad lately? Not really. He's been really stressed. I can imagine. He keeps saying everyone is trying to take advantage of him. I almost laughed. Instead I asked, how are you doing? There was a short silence. I'm okay. He didn't sound convinced. Before ending the call, he quietly added something that stayed with me. I wish everyone would just tell the truth. After we hung up, I couldn't stop thinking about that sentence. Micah had spent years listening to different versions of reality. Mine. Dad's. Everyone else's. Eventually, facts always win. But sometimes they take longer than people do. 2 months after the banquet, another unexpected development arrived. Not from Dad. Not from the trust. But from a law office whose name I didn't recognize. The receptionist walked into my office holding a sealed envelope. It was delivered by courier. I thanked her. Then I opened it. Inside was a formal legal notice. My father had hired an attorney. According to the documents, he intended to accuse me of secretly interfering with family finances and causing him significant financial losses. I read the paperwork twice. Then a third time. The accusations were almost impressive in how confidently they ignored reality. He genuinely believed I had damaged him. He still had absolutely no idea that the only reason his financial life had functioned for years was because I had quietly been holding it together. I placed the documents back into the envelope. For the first time since the banquet, I smiled. Not because I wanted a fight. Because lawsuits require evidence. And evidence had always been the one language I spoke better than anyone else. The legal notice stayed on my desk for less than an hour before I called the attorney listed at the bottom of the first page. His assistant answered. After confirming my name, she politely informed me that all future communication regarding the lawsuit should go through legal counsel. I thanked her, ended the call, and leaned back in my chair. Dad had actually done it. Instead of asking a single question, he had hired a lawyer. That decision would become the biggest mistake of his life. The following morning, I contacted an attorney recommended by one of my corporate clients. Her name was Serena Vale. Unlike the dramatic lawyers portrayed in television shows, Serena spoke quietly, listened carefully, and interrupted only when something actually mattered. She read every page of Dad's complaint without changing her expression. When she finished, she folded the papers neatly. Did you ever sign an agreement promising to pay his personal expenses? No. Did he ever compensate you for handling any of those payments? Never. Did you take any money belonging to him? Not $1. She nodded once. Then this case isn't nearly as complicated as he believes. I thought the meeting was over. Instead, Serena asked one more question. Do you have records? I almost laughed. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. She smiled for the first time. I'll take that as a yes. By the end of the week, I had assembled nearly 4 years of documentation. Bank transfers. Electronic confirmations. Insurance renewals. Property tax receipts. Repair invoices. Maintenance contracts. Email correspondence. Digital timestamps. Everything was organized by month. Every payment could be traced from beginning to end. Looking at the files in chronological order surprised even me. I hadn't realized just how many problems had quietly disappeared before reaching Dad. Broken furnace. Emergency plumbing. Storm damage. Electrical repairs. Insurance deductibles. County fees. Every single issue had been resolved before it had a chance to interrupt his comfortable routine. The evidence wasn't emotional. It was simply complete. While Serena prepared our legal response, something unexpected happened. A woman called my office asking if she could meet me in person. She introduced herself as Celestine Oakes. The name meant nothing to me. At first. Then she mentioned my grandmother. Everything changed. We met 2 days later at a small cafe near the courthouse. Celestine looked to be in her late 60s, with silver hair neatly tied back and a leather briefcase that had clearly traveled through decades of legal work. She wasted very little time. I handled several matters for your grandmother before she passed away. I nodded. I remember another attorney managing the trust. He did. I handled a different part of her estate. She carefully opened the briefcase and removed a thick folder. I've been trying to locate you for several months. My curiosity immediately turned into concern. Why? She slid the folder across the table. Because these documents were misplaced. I frowned. Misplaced? She sighed. When the county archive digitized older probate records, one storage box was incorrectly catalogued. We believed these papers had been destroyed. She waited for me to open the folder. Inside were original signed documents bearing my grandmother's signature. Some I recognized. Others I had never seen before. Then I found a sealed statement marked Private Family Declaration. My heartbeat slowed. Celestine watched me carefully. Your grandmother instructed that statement to remain private unless legal disputes involving the trust ever occurred. I looked up. There is a legal dispute now. There is. She nodded. You may read it. I carefully opened the envelope. The first sentence immediately caught my attention. If this document is being read because Garrick has challenged the trust, then my greatest concern has unfortunately become reality. I kept reading. My grandmother described my father with remarkable honesty. Not cruelty. Not anger. Just precision. She explained that he had always measured success by how impressive his life appeared to strangers. Whenever he gained control over money, unnecessary spending quickly followed. Luxury purchases. Expensive memberships. Status symbols. She feared that, after her death, assets intended to provide long-term security would eventually be converted into short-term appearances. That was why she structured the trust the way she did. Not to punish him. To protect Micah. She specifically wrote that any person voluntarily helping preserve those assets should never be viewed as financially responsible for Garrick's choices. Near the end of the statement, one paragraph made me stop reading altogether. If Elodie chooses to help after I am gone, I hope nobody mistakes kindness for obligation. Kindness should never become invisible simply because it is consistent. I slowly closed the folder. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Celestine broke the silence. Your grandmother understood people exceptionally well. I nodded. I wish I'd known she wrote this. So do I. She explained that once the lawsuit had been filed, the declaration could legally become part of the court record because it directly explained the trust's purpose. Dad had unknowingly triggered the release himself. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. As we finished our coffee, Celestine handed me one final document. It was an inventory showing exactly what the trust owned. The duplex. Reserve accounts. Maintenance funds. Insurance protections. Everything matched the records I had maintained for years. Nothing belonged personally to Dad. He had simply benefited from living alongside assets designed to protect someone else. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about Grandma's words. Kindness should never become invisible simply because it is consistent. For years, I had believed staying quiet was the mature choice. Maybe it had been. Maybe it hadn't. Either way, the silence was ending. A week later, Serena called. The court scheduled the first hearing. When? 3 weeks. Anything else? There is. Her tone became noticeably more serious. Your father submitted a sworn statement. What does it say? He claims he personally paid every expense connected to the property for years. I closed my eyes. That wasn't an exaggeration. That wasn't selective memory. That was objectively false. Serena continued. If he repeats that under oath, we'll have an opportunity to present every financial record. I looked toward my office window overlooking downtown Seattle. Rain had started falling across the city. Steady. Quiet. Unavoidable. Just like the truth. For the first time since the retirement banquet, I wasn't wondering whether the truth would come out. I was wondering how my father would react when he realized the evidence had been waiting for him all along. The courthouse was quieter than I expected. Television had convinced me that lawsuits were loud, dramatic, and full of constant objections. Reality was different. People spoke softly. Folders replaced speeches. Facts mattered more than volume. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived nearly 30 minutes early with Serena. She carried 2 organized binders. I carried 1 laptop containing digital copies of every financial record connected to the trust. Neither of us had much to say. There wasn't anything left to rehearse. The documents would speak for themselves. As we entered the courtroom, I immediately saw Dad sitting beside his attorney. He looked confident. He wore one of his expensive tailored suits and smiled at everyone who recognized him. When he noticed me, the smile disappeared. He looked away without saying a word. Micah was already seated in the back row. When our eyes met, he gave me a small nod. It wasn't support. It wasn't disapproval. It was uncertainty. He still didn't know which version of the family story was real. I couldn't blame him. The hearing began exactly on schedule. After several routine procedural matters, the judge invited Dad's attorney to present his client's claims. The arguments sounded polished. According to Dad, I had interfered with family finances, withheld important information, and intentionally caused him financial hardship by disrupting payments that should have continued. Listening to it felt strange. Every sentence ignored one very important question. Who had actually been making those payments in the first place? When Dad took the witness stand, he spoke with complete confidence. He described himself as the family's provider. He claimed he had always managed the household expenses responsibly. He even suggested I had become resentful after achieving financial success. Several people in the gallery quietly nodded. His story sounded believable. Right up until the evidence arrived. When it became Serena's turn, she stood calmly and approached the witness. Mr. Smirnova, I have just a few questions. Dad smiled politely. Of course. For the past 4 years, who paid the property taxes associated with your residence? I did. Serena glanced briefly toward the judge. Can you explain which account those payments came from? My checking account. Do you have statements confirming that? They should exist somewhere. She nodded once. Then she asked another question. Who paid the homeowner's insurance premiums? I handled those too. What about maintenance invoices for the duplex? I paid everything. His confidence never changed. Neither did Serena's expression. She walked back to our table and opened the first binder. Your Honor, we'd like to submit certified financial records. The judge approved the request. Serena handed copies to the court, opposing counsel, and the witness. Then she displayed the same documents on a courtroom monitor. Every payment appeared in chronological order. Each transfer listed the originating account. Every account belonged either to the trust or to me. None belonged to Dad. The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Serena continued. Mr. Smirnova, could you point to a single payment originating from your personal account? Dad adjusted his glasses. He flipped through several pages. Then several more. He stopped. The silence stretched longer than any argument could have. His attorney leaned toward him and whispered something. Dad shook his head. There must be missing records. Serena answered immediately. There are no missing records. She introduced county receipts, insurance confirmations, electronic transfer histories, invoices signed by contractors, digital payment authorizations. Every document matched perfectly. The timeline was complete. The judge reviewed several pages before looking directly at Dad. Mr. Smirnova, the records before this court indicate someone else consistently satisfied these obligations. Dad shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't aware of that. The judge raised an eyebrow. You testified moments ago that you personally made every payment. No one spoke. Even Dad's attorney looked stunned. The confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier disappeared. Then Serena made one final request. Your Honor, we'd also like to submit a private declaration written by the late Nadia Smirnova regarding the purpose of the trust. Celestine Oakes stepped forward from the gallery after being called as a witness. She calmly explained how the declaration had been recovered from archived probate files after a cataloging error. She confirmed its authenticity. The judge accepted it into evidence. The courtroom remained silent while he read several pages. No one interrupted. No one whispered. When he finished, he removed his reading glasses and looked directly at Dad. The intent of this trust appears exceptionally clear. Dad's attorney quietly requested a short recess. Outside the courtroom, people gathered in small groups discussing what they had just seen. Micah walked toward me slowly. I didn't know. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I know. I really didn't know. I believe you. He looked exhausted. So, you've been paying all of that? For years. Why didn't you tell anyone? I thought about Grandma's declaration. Kindness should never become invisible simply because it is consistent. I wasn't trying to prove anything. He stared at the courthouse floor for several seconds. Then he quietly said something that hurt more than Dad's accusations ever had. He always told me you stopped caring about us. I felt my throat tighten. I never stopped caring about you. The bailiff announced that the hearing would resume. Everyone returned to their seats. When proceedings continued, Dad's attorney surprised the entire courtroom. He requested permission to withdraw several of the claims made in the original lawsuit. The judge granted the request but continued reviewing the remaining issues. By late afternoon, the ruling was delivered. The lawsuit was dismissed. The court found no evidence that I had caused unlawful financial harm. Instead, the documented records established that I had voluntarily paid obligations I was never legally required to cover. The judge also ordered Dad to bear responsibility for his own legal expenses. No celebration followed. No dramatic speeches. Just paperwork. As people slowly left the courtroom, Dad remained seated. For the first time in my life, I saw him without an explanation ready. Without an audience willing to applaud. Without a story that survived contact with the evidence. I thought the hardest part of my life had just ended. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because outside that courthouse, the person whose opinion mattered most was still trying to decide who his family really was. The courtroom was behind us. the paperwork was finished. The lawsuit had been dismissed. By every legal definition, the case was over. But families don't heal the moment a judge signs an order. If anything, that was when the hardest conversations finally began. For nearly 2 weeks after the hearing, I didn't hear a single word from Dad. No phone calls. No emails. No angry messages. The silence felt unfamiliar. For years, there had always been another complaint, another accusation, or another attempt to rewrite what had happened. Now there was nothing. I focused on work. One investigation took me to Portland for several days, where my team was helping a manufacturing company recover millions of dollars hidden through fraudulent vendor payments. It reminded me why I loved my profession. Every mystery eventually left a trail. The challenge was having the patience to follow it. When I returned to Seattle, I found someone waiting outside my apartment building. Micah. He stood beside a worn backpack and 2 cardboard boxes. At first I thought he was just visiting. Then I noticed everything he owned was sitting on the sidewalk beside him. You moved out. He nodded. I couldn't stay there anymore. What happened? He looked exhausted. After court, Dad kept saying everyone betrayed him. I stayed quiet. He blamed you. Another pause. Then he blamed Grandma. Micah shook his head. After that, he started blaming me because I wouldn't tell people he had one. I slowly picked up one of the boxes. Come upstairs. Inside my apartment, I made coffee while Micah looked around the living room. He had only visited once before. Neither of us spoke until we were both sitting at the dining table. Finally, he took a deep breath. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. I do. He looked directly at me. I believed him. I didn't answer. He spent years telling me you only cared about your career. He told me you never wanted to help. He said Grandma trusted him, not you. Micah rubbed his hands together nervously. I believed all of it. I leaned forward. You were a kid. I wasn't by the end. His voice cracked slightly. I should have asked you instead of assuming. I reached across the table. We're talking now. He nodded slowly. For the first time in years, the conversation felt honest. No performances. No interruptions. No one trying to control the narrative. Over the next several days, I showed Micah everything. The trust documents. The financial statements. Grandma's declaration. The maintenance records. Even the calendar reminders I had created years earlier to make sure nothing important was ever missed. He read every page. Sometimes twice. When he finished, he quietly closed the final folder. I had no idea how much work this actually was. Most people didn't. I thought bills just got paid. I smiled faintly. They do. By someone. That sentence stayed with both of us. A week later, we met with Celestine and Serena to discuss the future of the trust. The original purpose had always been simple. Protect Micah until he was ready to manage his own future. Now he was old enough to participate in those decisions. Instead of continuing the same arrangement, we created a completely transparent plan. The duplex would be professionally renovated. Rental income would go directly into an education and investment account for Micah. Every payment would be documented. Every expense reviewed together. No hidden responsibilities. No invisible sacrifices. No assumptions. When the meeting ended, Celestine smiled at both of us. I think your grandmother would be very proud today. For the first time since her funeral, I believed that might actually be true. Meanwhile, Dad's situation continued changing. Without someone quietly solving financial problems behind the scenes, the lifestyle he had worked so hard to project became impossible to maintain. The country club membership expired. His luxury SUV was repossessed after several missed payments. The expensive landscaping disappeared entirely. Neighbors who once admired his picture-perfect property now watched contractors place notices on the front door regarding overdue maintenance. None of it happened because I took revenge. It happened because reality finally caught up with appearances. Word about the court case spread faster than I expected. Not because I told anyone. Because court records are public. Former co-workers from Dad's retirement banquet eventually learned what had actually happened. Several of them reached out to apologize. One man admitted he had believed every word Dad spoke that night. Another confessed he felt uncomfortable during the speech but assumed there had to be a reason. I thanked them for their honesty. Then I moved on. I wasn't interested in collecting apologies. The truth had already done everything I needed it to do. About 3 months later, I received an unexpected text message. It was from Dad. Only 6 words appeared on my screen. You could have warned me. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply. Another part realized there was nothing left to explain. For 4 years, every paid bill had been a warning. Every solved emergency had been a warning. Every invisible responsibility had been a warning. He simply never noticed because he believed those things existed for his convenience. I locked my phone without responding. Some conversations end long before people stop talking. The following weekend, Micah and I drove to the duplex Grandma had left in the trust. Construction crews were finishing the renovations. Fresh paint covered the walls. New windows reflected the afternoon sun. The property looked completely different from the neglected building I remembered. Micah stood quietly in the front yard. It finally feels like something Grandma would recognize. I smiled. She always believed taking care of things mattered. He nodded. Not showing them off. Exactly. That was the difference. Dad had spent his life investing in appearances. Grandma had invested in stability. One disappeared almost overnight. The other continued protecting the people she loved long after she was gone. Standing there beside my little brother, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. Not because I had one. Because I no longer had to carry everything alone. And for the first time since that retirement banquet, the future felt lighter than the past. A full year passed before I saw my father again. It wasn't at a family gathering. It wasn't at a holiday dinner. And it certainly wasn't because either of us had planned it. I was leaving a financial technology conference in downtown Seattle when I spotted him standing across the street outside a small office building. At first, I almost didn't recognize him. The tailored suits were gone. The luxury watch he never stopped showing off had disappeared. Even his posture looked different. He seemed smaller. Not physically. Just tired. For a moment, I considered walking away. Then our eyes met. Neither of us smiled. Neither of us waved. He slowly crossed the street until we were standing only a few feet apart. I heard you're doing well, he said. I'm doing fine. A long silence followed. Traffic moved behind us. People walked past without paying attention. For once, there was no audience. No microphone. No applause. Just 2 people who hadn't spoken in nearly a year. Finally, he sighed. I lost a lot. I answered honestly. I know. I thought everyone abandoned me. I looked at him carefully. No. You stopped paying. I stopped paying bills that were never yours to expect. He lowered his eyes. I didn't know. I believe you. That surprised him. You do. I believe you never knew. He frowned. But? You never asked. The words hung between us. He couldn't argue with them. For years, he had accepted solutions without ever wondering who created them. He had accepted stability without asking what it cost someone else. Eventually, he nodded once. I spent too much time trying to look successful. I didn't interrupt. I guess I forgot success isn't something other people are supposed to finance. Those were the most honest words I had ever heard him say. I appreciated them. But appreciation isn't the same thing as trust. Trust takes much longer. We talked for another 10 minutes. Mostly about Micah. Dad admitted they hadn't spoken very often. Micah had chosen to focus on college and rebuilding his own life. I told Dad that decision deserved respect. He agreed. Before leaving, he looked at me one last time. I'm sorry. The apology came quietly. Without excuses. Without blaming anyone else. I accepted it. Not because it erased the past. Because carrying resentment any longer wouldn't improve the future. We walked in opposite directions. I didn't look back. Some endings don't require reconciliation. Only acceptance. Over the following months, life settled into a routine that finally felt healthy. Micah thrived in college. The renovated duplex generated reliable rental income exactly as Grandma had intended. Every quarterly financial review became almost boring. And honestly, boring felt wonderful. There were no hidden emergencies. No unpaid bills waiting to surprise someone. No invisible responsibilities resting on one person's shoulders. Everything was open. Everything was documented. Everything belonged where it should. At work, I received a promotion and accepted a leadership role overseeing larger financial investigations. My team joked that I trusted spreadsheets more than people. They weren't entirely wrong. Spreadsheets had never lied to me. People sometimes did. One autumn afternoon, Micah invited me to visit Grandma's grave. We hadn't gone together since shortly after her funeral. The cemetery overlooked a quiet hillside lined with tall evergreen trees. We brought fresh white flowers. After placing them beside her headstone, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Micah broke the silence. I think she knew this would happen. What do you mean? I think she knew Dad would eventually have to face himself. I looked down at Grandma's name engraved in the stone. Maybe. And I think she knew you'd keep helping anyway. I smiled softly. I almost didn't. But you did. Not for him. I know. He looked toward the trees. You did it for me. That was true. It had always been true. On the drive home, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. Helping someone isn't the same as allowing them to depend on your silence. Compassion without boundaries eventually becomes permission. And permission can quietly grow into entitlement. Stopping those payments hadn't been an act of revenge. It had been an act of honesty. For Dad. For Micah. And for myself. If I had continued hiding the truth, nothing would have changed. Dad would have kept believing he earned everything. Micah would have kept believing I never cared. And I would have kept carrying responsibilities no one even realized existed. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices. Not because you want them to suffer. Because it's the only way they might finally learn. Looking back now, I don't remember the retirement banquet as the night my father humiliated me. I remember it as the night the illusion finally started to collapse. His words pushed me into making one decision. A decision that exposed years of hidden truth. He shouted, "All you ever do is take." But the facts told a completely different story. I had spent years giving. Quietly. Consistently. Without asking for recognition. The moment I stopped, everyone finally noticed what had been missing all along. If there's one lesson my family's story taught me, it's this. Never confuse silent generosity with endless obligation. People may overlook what you do every day, but the truth has a remarkable way of surviving longer than any false story. Thank you for spending your time with me and following my journey from that unforgettable night to the life I have today. If this story made you think, moved you, or reminded you of someone you've known, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future stories. I'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever helped someone for years without them realizing it? And if you had been in my position, would you have kept paying, or walked away much sooner? Until next time, take care of yourself, and thank you for listening.